Hi everyone. So today we will learn how to program in Python, and I have some simple programs to get you started. Some of these programs are simple, and some of them are actually more than challenging. So we will see we can write a program in Python. I'm using a Jupyter notebook and Python 3.8, I think, and I can verify that. So I simply need to write exclamation mark and python minus version, and it will tell us what Python version I'm using. So it says Python 3.9.13, and that's the version I'm using. Okay, so our first question that we will program says write a program that prompts the user to enter a decimal number and displays the number in a fraction. Fraction should be in the smallest form without any common factor between numerator and denominator. Now this seems like a fairly challenging problem. We have to write a program that prompts the user to enter a decimal number. So when we are writing programs, and if something looks very challenging, what we try to do is we try to break it down into simple steps and try to work through those steps. So now if I have no idea what I'm going to do next, what I'm going to do to solve this problem, what I will do is first I will try to pick that line and code it. The first line says prompt the user to enter a decimal number. So I'm just going to write code for that. And we know that in Python we have this keyword called input, and we can simply put a prompt here. So let's say the prompt says enter a decimal number, and user will be able to enter a decimal number through the console. Now we want to save this number in a variable. So let's say we call this variable num and decimal. Okay, so or num float. Now we can run this code and see. I will put a decimal number, so say 1.367. So that's the number I have entered, and it is saved in this variable called num float. Now we can convert this number into a float right away. So, or because this number is a string, we might just try to find out where does the decimal point occur. So that will give us an idea of how many decimal numbers are there. Because ultimately the question is we need to convert this number into a fraction. Now user input is always saved as a string data type, so we know that. So either we convert this number into a decimal number into a float right away, because we can verify the type of data, and if you write type num float, you will see that you have got a string data type, which is not the data type we want. But I think if we keep it in a string for the moment, and if we can find out the decimal point, that could be helpful. So now we can use a function called find. So we have this num float, which is the name of the variable, and we can write dot find, and we want to look for the decimal point, so that's a dot. This should return us the index where the decimal point occurs. So we have got this index now, which is 1. We can also use it to split the decimal point. So we could do something like num float dot split, and we use that decimal point to split the number. So you can see how I'm working through my ideas and trying to figure out how to do this, because before solving right now, before writing the code right now, I have never thought about this problem, how to do this problem. So I'm trying to solve the problem, and I'm trying to develop an algorithm to solve this this question, and I'm explaining my thought process as well. So I have this num float dot split, and I can use this full stop sign to split the string, and we can see the output is 1 and 367. So we have these two outputs, which means now we can separate the integral part and the decimal part, right? So what we do is we create two variables out of it. So I'm gonna save the integer part, so I'm just gonna name it int part, and I will save 1, which was the integral part, in the first one. So I have int part num float dot split, and the first part is 0, so I'm going to save that there, and I will save the decimal part in another variable, and I will call it dec part is equal to, and then let's say we call this now. We can print these two variables and verify that we have saved them correctly. So I will put print int part, and I will also do the second part. I will print the second variable called dec part. So we can run this, and we have verified that the integer part is saved in the first number, and 367 is the another one. Now we want to display this number in a fraction. So for the decimal part, we know that these digits 367 occurred after the decimal, and there are 3 digits, which means this number can be actually so 0.367 should be 367 divided by 1000. So if I have I can say that this number, the numerator for the decimal part, so I'm just gonna say decimal numerator. Okay, so I just want to call it a decimal numerator, and it should be equal to the decimal part, right? And how do we programmatically say the denominator is 1000? So we have denominator is equal to, and what I will do is I will say that denominator is equal to 10 raised to power, so it should be 10 e, and whatever the length of the decimal part is. So I can say length of the decimal part is, I can simply write DEC part, that number. Okay, so now you can see that I'm getting an error. It says syntax error, and there's a reason for that, because I have to separate E and len, because len is a method. It tells you the length of the string. So 367 has a length of 3, and I wanted it to write like 10e3, that means 10 raised to power 3. So I wanted this to be equivalent to something like 10 raised to power 3 is basically 1000 in exponential notation is written like that. So if I have got I got an error in the console, and I took the clue from there and fixed the error, but clearly that hasn't worked. So now what am I missing there? So let me see if 10e3 is actually 1000 or not. So it's actually 10,000. So that's another mistake. It's actually 10 into 10 raised to power 3. So if I want 1000, it should be 1e3. Okay, so 1000 and then 1e3 here, and I can run this again. I will remove 10 there, so 1e3. Now it's still not working, so clearly this len dec part I should make it separate. It will be easier that I just save it in another variable. So I'm just gonna call it power, and I will put here, so it will calculate the length of the decimal part, and I will just write here 1e power. But it may still not work actually, but let me verify. It does not actually. Will it work if I write? Okay, so I have another solution for this. I'm just gonna use POW, the power function, and I just want 10, and the power should be simply the power that we just calculated, and I believe this can solve our problem. So you can see that I tried several different things and I was not able to get the correct answer, but now this seems to be working, as I can print decimal denominator and I can see the result is 1000. So now I have got a numerator and a denominator, and the question also says fraction should be in the smallest form without any common factor between numerator and denominator. If your math is good, you can kind of guess that 367 and 1000, they do not have anything in common, because 1000 is only divisible by 2 or 5, whereas 367 is not divisible by 2 or 5. But we need, because in programming we need to take care of the situations which may arise later on. So what I'm going to do here is that I will input a different decimal number and say, so I will put something like 1.25. okay, so now this 1.25 should be equivalent to 1 plus 1 by 4. So I'm going to, as you can see, all parts have evaluated correctly, but now I need to find the common factor in the variable decimal numerator, okay, and decimal denominator. Okay, now first thing is, we know that decimal denominator is an int, but decimal numerator is actually data type string, because we got it right after splitting the string. So we need to convert this decimal part into an integer first, and for that so we need to convert this decimal numerator into an integer. The easiest way to do that is take this number and just use the int function. So this is equal to int, and it will convert the string into an integer, and we can verify that. Now we need to find out the common factors between these two numbers and divide those numbers by the common factors and get the smallest value in between the two. So to divide the two numbers by the, we need to find the greatest common factor between the two. Now in this form, the numerator is, we know that numerator is smaller than the denominator, but we could also create a situation where numerator is not smaller than the denominator, but because we just took the decimal part only, so the numerator is smaller than the denominator. So what we could do is we want to find out the greatest common factor between the two. So let's say we create a loop and the number starts from 25, right? That's the greatest common factor possible. Okay, but we still have to check. Maybe 25 divides both numbers, 25 and 100. It does actually. But there might be other situations where it may not finish in one step. So what I'm going to do is, say I take so I will check if decimal numerator divided by, so we know that there is a percent operator which gives the remainder. So what we want is, this is the smaller number, so what we want is I will divide this number by decimal numerator, and if the remainder is 0, right, and the second number is decimal denominator, right, so if decimal denominator is divided by decimal numerator, and if that's also 0, then we know that that's the greatest common divisor, so, or greatest common factor. So I'm just gonna say greatest and factor to name that variable is equal to so we are dividing by decimal numerator both the numbers, and that should be the decimal numerator. So this does not make much sense at the moment, because we just divided both of them by 25, and we know that this is true, but it won't happen in always. So we need to have a loop, and say we start dividing by the decimal numerator. So let's say factor is equal to decimal numerator, we call this, okay, and we will divide numbers by this factor, and this factor we will check if it is greater than 1 or not, because we know that 1 is always a factor of all the numbers, so it has to be greater than 1, right? And then we have an if statement, and we will divide these two numbers by the factor, right? And we have got this one as well. And now, so we are dividing numerator and denominator both by factor, and if in both cases the remainder is 0, because we are choosing the higher number and going backwards, okay, so the first case, when this happens, when the numerator and denominator both are divided by factor, and the remainder is 0 in both the cases, then we know that we have gotten the greatest common factor, and so we can save it here as factor, and then we don't need to run the loop anymore, right, because we have found the greatest common factor. So we can just write break keyword here, and it will take the logic out of this while loop. And now after we are out of the while loop, we can one more thing, because it's this is inside a while loop, and we need to write a statement which will decrease the factor, because we only want it to run till factor is we only want it to run maybe from 2 to 25, so that's around 24 times. So we only want it to run 24 times. So we also need to write this line of code which will keep reducing the value of factor whenever a loop runs. So factor is equal to factor minus 1, which means it will decrease the value of factor by 1, and the while loop will keep running. Okay, and we want to know the final value of factor. So we can write, we can have a print statement. So it says greatest common factor is, and we can write here factor. Okay, so let's run this code and see what happens. So we know that greatest common factor is 25. Okay, I'm going to take another example which might be a bit more complicated. So let's say I will run this code again, and I'm gonna put something like 1.56. okay, so that looks a bit complicated. Okay, so again we can verify it's a string. We will find where does the decimal occurs. So it occurs at location 1, and we split that, so we have got 1 and 56. Right, so now we will again take the numerator and denominator separately. We have got denominator to be 100, and we can convert the numerator into integer and print the numerator and denominator. So we have 56 and 100 here. Now this time 56, it will start with the 56 and it will divide both the numbers by 56. Obviously 100 is not divisible by 56, so the answer cannot be 56, and it will iteratively, it will try to find out the greatest common factor. So after 56 it will check for 55, then 54, then 53, and we see that the greatest common factor is 4 here. Okay, so now to find out the simplest form of numerator and denominator, all we need to do is we get the numerator, and it's simply the decimal numerator divided by the greatest common factor, right? And the denominator is simply decimal denominator divided by factor, and we can print our result. So we can have a print statement. So the fraction is so we can write the integral part. So integral part is simply, we can write the int part is there, right? So we can simply write int part and then comma. We can write, we may want to give some space, so I'm just gonna put some space here, comma, and then we have the numerator and denominator. So I'm just gonna write the numerator, and then between numerator and denominator I'm just gonna put front slash. So, and then I can take the denominator and put here. Okay, so let's print this, and we will see that there is an error. So that's because I didn't run this cell yet, so I will run it. So our answer is fraction is 1/14/25. Now so 1 is the integral part, and 14/25 is the fractional part. If you wanted to write this without this integral part typed separately or printed separately, we can also write numerator will be equal to, so we can also write it like this: fraction is comma, so numerator is int part. Now remember, int part I never converted into a number, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert int part into an integer right here. So I will just take the number and just convert this using int method. I will just convert the data from float to integer. Okay, so I ran that one, and now I can simply say that I can calculate the numerator. So that's going to be denominator, okay, denominator multiplied by the int part added to the numerator. So this is the new numerator, and then I can put a front slash, and then I can put the denominator. Okay, so yeah, denominator here, and this should give us the fraction that we want. So fraction is 39/25. So now you can see that we have solved this problem. If I don't want to, I can merge all the cells together to get the program. So what I'm going to do is, or okay, I will leave it as it is for now. But you know that if you don't want to run the cells separately, you can just merge them using in edit. You have this merge cell above or merge cell below, and you can merge all the code together so that you can run it in just one go. So I hope this was helpful.